gentlemen. Thank you, Bob, for that kind introduction. Thank you very much for your very warm reception. I very much appreciate it. I hope it is not lost on all in attendance the significant bipartisan nature of the participants in today's forum. We are looking for things in this town, for policy objectives and outcomes that we would like to be shared by both sides of the aisle, and I guess it's very important and a very visible statement that these Republicans and these Democrats have worked for Republican and Democrat administrations feel unanimously that the designation of MEK should be lifted and should be lifted now. So I think it's a pretty good ladies and gentlemen, I've said this before. Some of my friends have heard it, but I'll keep saying it until the designation is lifted. Time is not our ally in our collective efforts to prevent the tyrannical regime in Tehran from becoming a nuclear power. As a matter of fact, time is running out. We need to understand that. I'd like to read you something that was written and spoken in September of 1995. Listen carefully. I wish to address a pivotal issue: how to confront this regime and the fundamentalism and terrorism it fosters. The issue is key because on the international level, all approaches and policies vis-a-vis the mullah's religious terrorist dictatorship have proven futile. Indeed, in many cases, they have taken advantage of by the regime, which has been the only party to benefit from them. September 1995, Maryam Rajavi, President-elect, National Council of Resistance of Iran. 1995, push forward to January of 2011. What has changed? Has there been a regime change? Is there less oppression, more freedom, more peaceful engagement with the rest of the world? 16 years later, nothing has changed, and I think time is running out. It was interesting when the parties met in December, and they agreed to meet in December knowing full well that when the representatives from the Iranian government appeared, they were not inclined to discuss their nuclear intentions. One does wonder why everybody bothered showing up, because the only thing they agreed to do at that time was they agreed to convene again. In anticipation of the next meeting, which is in the next couple of weeks, the UN ambassador has basically said that in regard to the UN and EU sanctions that have been directed against Iran for its noncompliance with UN resolutions over its nuclear program, the ambassador said, quote, "The issue of sticks and carrots proved to be unsuccessful, and that Iran would not respond to political pressures nor sanctions." Well, they won't respond to political pressures. They won't respond to sanctions. They'll certainly be willing to meet over the next 16 or 17 years. So every legitimate effort, as well-intentioned as it may have been, have proven to be quite unsuccessful. Nothing has changed. Time is running out. Be very interested in hearing the observations of some of my colleagues on the panel, but in my judgment, the Western world presently faces no greater threat than from Iran. So you've got Iran and all these surrogates, and the only thing that MEK has asked of us is to delist us, give us the same opportunity in a very controlled and repressive society which is using the MEK designation to continue to imprison, oppress, imprison, torture, and often murder. Just lift the designation. That's all we're asking. I asked a very significant political figure a couple of years ago in the Middle East, given all the challenges associated with the Middle East, how would you identify the top three priorities, the top three problems? You know what the individual said? Iran, Iran, I think one of the best ways to do it, and I think would have a profound impact on the negotiations that are scheduled if the designation was lifted before the other countries met with the Iranian delegation. That would be a significant change of policy and send an entirely different signal to the regime. Interesting what happened in Tunisia, isn't it? People took to the streets. Quite quickly, the administration responded, and in a very positive and supportive way of those voices of democracy, voices of change. Interestingly enough, unlike Iran, the military didn't come to the assistance of Ben Ali. For whatever reason, they stayed on the sidelines. But the administration applauded the move, the effort to bring democracy and freedom to Tunisia. They were fairly mute after the fraudulent elections in Iran. Again, I don't quite understand the inconsistency in the policy. And as we say time and time again, both publicly and privately, the resistance and the MEK, they're not looking for money. They're not looking for arms. They just want the freedom to speak. They want to be delisted and take action into their own hands. We need to do that for them because time is running out. In the late 1990s, to curry favor, as the Attorney General mentioned, the U.S. declared the People's Mujahideen of Iran to be a terrorist organization, and many allies followed suit. You may extend a hand, an open hand, to try to resolve a challenge, but on the other end, if there's a clenched fist, it's very unlikely the two of you are going to be able to reach a peaceful impasse on those issues. Time is running out. A policy must be changed. One would think that more than any other part of the world, the West understands the tragic, unthinkable consequences of appeasement. There are some pretty profound lessons of appeasing repressive regimes where the Western world has paid the consequences in both treasure and lives. And so we must reject as inconceivable and unacceptable the notion that a terrorist-supporting, nuclear-armed and threatening Iran could somehow be restrained through a Cold War strategy of deterrence. I believe a nuclear Iran would become an even greater global scourge, more emboldened, more destabilizing, and more threatening. Having the opportunity once again to share these thoughts with such a distinguished panel and such a distinguished group, I had occasion to look at the 10-point plan for future Iran that was announced again 5 years ago, in 2006. I'll run by you briefly. From our point of view, the ballot box is the only criterion for legitimacy. I'm going to give you a shortened, abbreviated version. We want a pluralist system. Number two, freedom of parties and assembly. In Iran of tomorrow, we will respect all individual freedoms. Three, in the free Iran of tomorrow, we support and are committed to the abolition of the death penalty. Four, the Iranian resistance will establish the separation of church and state. Any form of discrimination against the followers of all religions and denominations will be prohibited. We believe in complete gender equality in political and social rights. Six, we want to set up a modern legal system that goes on, basically recognizing the importance of the rule of law and due process. Seven, we are committed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and list other international covenants and conventions. And if you took a look at them in the UN Charter, you would see that the existing Iranian regime violates them every day. The new Iran accepts and embraces, promotes, and supports. Eight, we recognize private property, private investment in the market economy. A foreign policy, 9, would be based on peaceful coexistence, international and regional peace and cooperation, as well as respect for the United Nations Charter. And finally, we want the free Iran of tomorrow to be devoid of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. That's the Iran that the resistance the People's Mujahideen, MEK, have fought for, believe in. Remember, they relinquished their arms. They're protected under the Geneva Convention. And we have to send a message to al-Maliki and to the Iraqi government. The United States troops handed responsibility of protecting these individuals who are protected under the Geneva Convention to you. How can you tolerate those loudspeakers? And what about these incursions that precipitated some problems inside Camp Ashraf? You must heed the admonition. You promised to protect them under the Geneva Convention. Right now, one wonders the sincerity of that initial promise. I'll conclude, ladies and gentlemen, with just a couple of additional thoughts, if I might. I spent some time with some older Iranian women when I was in Paris in December. And we sat down, and through the interpreter we had conversations with them. And I wish I could take those who are going to make the decision in the State Department over to be with them or have them come over here and just listen to them very, very carefully. These older women carried pictures with them. Pictures of spouses and husbands, obviously. Children and grandchildren. Some of them were apprehended, imprisoned, tortured, and killed. And some were simply apprehended and tortured and, who knows, perhaps waiting execution. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is something that we embrace in our Declaration of Independence. And it just seems to me that all MEK is asking us to do when they say delist us. The EU has looked at this designation and said no. The UK has looked at the designation and said no, it's inappropriate. Our courts here have looked at the designation and said no, it's inappropriate. Listen to the cries of these women and the pleas of these women about their families, representing all the families that are in Camp Ashraf and the thousands and thousands that have been murdered because they are part of the democratic resistance. And also listen and learn from the lessons of time. The strategy hasn't worked. Listing them in 97 as a goodwill gesture has not affected a single change in their approach, has not de-accelerated or removed them or somehow interrupted their intentions to become a nuclear power, has certainly had no impact. So we say to all those in the State Department involved in making the decision in this administration, it's about time. The lessons of history and the pleas of these mothers and wives should be listened to now. Delist the MEK and let them take the voices of freedom to the street and do what they need to do to bring freedom and democracy in the kind of Iran that would live in harmony and in peaceful coexistence with its neighbors in the region and the rest of the world. Thank you very much.